Welcome to Scary Stories NYC. We've got 4 creepy Dogman stories for you today, but first, do you recognize this photo? What is this? Is this a real werewolf or Dogman? If you can identify this photo, please leave a comment, and the first one to get it right will receive a free, secret, uncensored Dogman story from this channel. Have you heard our newest secret, uncensored Dogman story? It's the one where this happens. I heard some terrible animal sounds coming from behind me. Turning around and squinting past the water, I saw one of the most upsetting sights I ever hoped to see. Again, I ask that you remove any children or sensitive people from the room before I continue. Secret Uncensored stories come out weekly and are available to all PayPal Club and channel members. Don't miss a single episode. And now on to our first of 4 creepy Dogman stories. And we call this one Midwest Dogman Turf War. Dear Scary Stories NYC, first of all, I want to say thank you for the platform you provide for us to allow us to anonymously report our sightings and experiences. Some of us have to cope not only with how horrifying the circumstances were that we lived through, but we also have to keep it all inside. It's not something that we can feel comfortable talking about with most people. It's not something I want attached to my name. Yet, I feel infuriated that I should have to hide the fact that I was present in a location when something happened, just because that something that happened is not officially considered possible. In the case of what happened to me, I'm talking about the Dogman. Or maybe they were werewolves. What does it matter what I call them? Neither is considered real, and nobody's gonna believe me anyhow. This happened in 1999 in Edenville Township, west of Lake Sanford in Michigan. I was hiking around with a friend from college that we can call Jane. I suppose then by default I must be Tarzan. We were just walking through woods and camping when we knew the sun would be going down. There was no rhyme or reason to our vacation. We just chose an area it would be difficult for us to get lost in since we were both from Michigan and both avid nature lovers since a very young age. On top of that, Edenville Township isn't exactly the dark side of the moon. In fact, half the time I think we might have been camping on private property, but I wasn't sure then, and I'm even less sure now. I just know that nearly every day we would happen upon a road or other landmark, and we'd recalculate our location using our compasses and our old paper maps. It felt like we always had a rough idea of where we were, and we really didn't need much more than that, and a supply of food and water. Jane and I were only casual friends back in civilization, but when we would go camping, we had a much closer relationship. Like most guys the age I was back then, I didn't understand it, but I wasn't gonna question it, and I wasn't gonna complain. As long as we went back to being more distant when we got back to the human world, she would get very close to me out in the wild. So, one night we were asleep in our tent, and all hell broke loose outside. Generally, Jane took the lead when there was a mystery, but the sounds coming from outside our tent on that night were not very easy to recognize or categorize. It sounded like hell itself had opened up onto the field we were camped in, and I'm not sure how else to describe or explain it. We were both terrified to look outside, but I could tell by the look on her face that I was going to have to be the one to open the flap and peek out of that tent. And so I did. And when I did, I saw that in fact hell had opened up onto the field outside our tent. I pulled my head back in and announced just that. Jane didn't appreciate me going poetic in that moment. She demanded a detailed description of what was happening. I told her that I saw werewolves battling other werewolves, and creatures that I could not name battling as well. She looked at me as though I were speaking Klingonese. Her annoyance at me grew until it was actually larger and stronger than her fear of whatever was happening outside. She crawled over to the tent flap to peek outside. I know what she saw. I'll tell you exactly what she saw. A battle, or skirmish in some conflict, was happening in that field. There were large, hairy, bipedal creatures racing around outside at speeds as fast as a large cat. These weren't cats, though. They looked more like thin, muscular bears, but they were far faster and more athletic than bears are. They were too wiry to be bears, although most of them seemed every inch as large. While most of those battling would seem to be more or less what you would call a werewolf, there were several variations of kinds, and there were also some that looked so different that I'm not 100% certain that they were dogmen or werewolves at all. One creature had a far larger forehead than any of the others. It almost reminded me of gray space aliens. Maybe that's a dogman of the future, come back in a time machine, I don't know. There were also some creatures that in another context I might have viewed as Sasquatch. They were tall and strong-looking, with large human-type feet. When I raised my eyes to their heads, though, they had floppy dog ears and long snouts. Tell me what I'm supposed to call that. Jane and I debated whether it made any sense to stay in that tent in that moment, or if we should try to make a break for it. We both avoided traveling in the woods at night, but we had passed a road that led to a police station shortly before setting up camp. If we were going to make a break for it, we decided that would be the direction to run in. We got our boots on and got prepared to go, even as we continued to debate whether we should sit tight or risk running out into a dogman on dogman military-style conflict. I have to say, when you're in a state of panic, finding something to do can take your mind off of the fact that you might find your life ended at any given moment. We got prepared to go. We got our backpacks packed, and mainly the only thing we wouldn't be bringing with us would be the tent itself. Nervous about going, we both decided to catch our breath and get ready for the run of our lives. Our plan was to carry the backpacks until we reached the woodline, then risk stopping to put them on so that we could move faster from that point. We were giving each other a good luck hug in case that was the last conversation we ever had, and then something large and heavy fell on the tent and both of us, knocking the wind out of us completely. It took a few seconds for the creature who had fallen on us to right itself and allow us to begin to wheeze and gasp for air to get back inside our lungs. We had been bonked pretty hard, but there were no broken bones, and if you've ever had the wind knocked out of you, then you know how painful it can be to try to get the air back inside of yourself after it's exited. We were starting to breathe again, and still recovering from that terrible experience, when something started slicing the tent open from the top on down. It looked like a small dagger at first, but as the opening grew, I saw two glowing eyes looking in at us. That wasn't a dagger. It was a huge claw from one of those dogman creatures. Jane and I staggered out of the tent to witness chaos all around us. If you ever thought that ridding the world of weaponry would end war, then you should have seen what we saw. It was hand to hand or claw to teeth, maybe. There were passed out dogmen in every direction, with the rest dancing over the prone bodies at lightning speed, battling to the very last man. As we ran toward the part of the woods we needed to get to, it was a broken field run. We had to keep dodging left or running right to avoid creatures attacking each other, or else the unconscious creatures lying all around. I saw so many different variations on the same basic dog-headed human theme that I wondered who was battling who and what the fight was over. Could it be that multiple factions were engaged in this conflict? Could 3 or more different groupings of creatures be fighting over the same turf? I saw more than 4 different kinds of dogmen, so who knows how many armies there were. I saw wolf-headed bipedal dogmen. I saw large wolves that only stood up at certain times while fighting. I saw more than one with a long baboon-like snout but dog ears. I saw four-legged fast-moving animals with canine bodies and horrific, near-human faces. I mean, they had dog ears. They weren't entirely human. But on the body of a dog, these were disturbing things to see. I guess I should be grateful I only had the moon lighting them. The less detail, the better, in my opinion. As Jane and I entered those woods, it got colder, and it got weirder. By the time we were halfway to our goal of that street that led to the police station, we could hear something loudly pursuing us. It was making a point of destroying as much of the forest as it could as it made its way closer to us. The thing's barks sounded more like screams, and those screams sounded like threats. As the dogman got closer behind us, his cries grew deafeningly loud. They literally hurt my ears, and I was a guy who liked loud concerts at the time. It was absolutely terrifying being pursued in that way. I mean, it was completely unnerving. The worst night of my life, and I once spent a night in a county jail. So we came to the road and almost got hit by a cop car. At least I did. I saw him, but my legs were like lead weights, and I found it too hard to reverse course and get out of his way in time. This forced the cop to swerve and almost get into an accident himself before he was able to stop the police vehicle. Wait, maybe he was a park ranger? Could that be? It's strange that I don't remember his uniform. I do remember he seemed Irish, and when we told him that there was a war between werewolves just a short walk into the woods, he told us that we had been seeing the wee folk and laughed. He started telling all these really bad, corny jokes that I can't remember. Like he said something like, "Do you know why they call them the wee folk?" We did not. Why? Because you only see them after you've had a wee drink. That sort of thing, not taking us seriously at all. We insisted we weren't drunk, and so he asked us to show him where this supposed battle between the dog-headed trolls was taking place. I thought about it. I mean, I did want to show him that we weren't drunk, and that we were telling the truth. But, on the other hand, I was tired, and I wondered if the officer or a ranger or whoever it was could give us a lift to a motel or something like that, which I vaguely remember that he did. So I never went camping again, except in RVs and rented cabins. I only hike during the day now, and I'm inside somewhere when it's dark out. To be honest, most of the sun and exercise I get these days, I get in my local city park. There's never been a report of even one dogman in that park, let alone an entire Midwest Dogman Turf War. Is it pronounced Edwin Nepomuceno 'cause he's hotter than a jalapeno? Or is it said like Nepomuceno, excitement, like a Reno casino? Possibly he's Nepomuceno, distinguished, like an old quill penno. I better finish this rhyme before it's time for bed. Remember, it's always a win with Ed. Please join me in thanking Edwin well, however you say it correctly. Let's just thank him, okay? I know he told me I said it wrong the last time, but I still don't know the right way how to say it. I just know that Edwin N. gets a lot of our perks. International TV spokesmongrel Henry Lee Dogman will be along at the very end of the show to bring you all the deets of how you, too, can get cool perks while helping our channel stay online. But now let's jump into our next story, which is called I Saw a Dogman Battle a Thing. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have but one cryptid tale to tell, and it happened in Canada many years back. I'm pretty sure one of the creatures I encountered was in fact a dogman, as it looked like a husky that was standing up. A big husky, and a husky one too. The other creature I still don't know what to make of. Several people have told me that I saw a Dogman battling with a Wendigo. 2 different people I told this story to felt that I witnessed the rake. One lady I met felt strongly that what I saw was a tall gray alien. I was the one who was actually there, but I really still can't say that I'm too sure what even happened to me that night, other than that I was being taught a lesson that I would never forget. So here's what happened. I was driving my old 1977 Ford Pinto north to meet some family and friends who were gathering at a park on the edge of Bark Lake up in Ontario. That's in Canada, for those of you not from around here. I was puttering down Route 523, which is forested on both sides, and I wasn't more than a few miles away from my destination. That is when my Pinto conked out. Those of you old enough will remember that the Pinto ceased being made after 1980 because they had gathered a reputation for exploding into flames when they were bumped from the rear. Although my Pinto was from 1977, this was the 80s, and I was still driving it. You know, my father later told me I was lucky the car died that way on the highway, rather than exploding with me inside. That car was the first major thing I had ever bought on my own, and so I thought my dad was just being a jerk by constantly insulting the car and telling me to dump it. Looking back, though, I can see that he was just trying to warn me that I bought a terrible make of car. I had such an emotional attachment to that car that it really made me sad when I rolled her to the margin of the road, couldn't start her again, and had to just leave her there. At the time, I dreamed of getting her fixed up, but I later found out that it would cost more to fix her than it would to get a good new used car that didn't blow up randomly. Since this was the 1980s, long before us regular people had cell phones, and since I was out in the middle of the country and not by any payphones, I decided to just cut through the woods and get to the park on foot. These days, there would be no reason to do such a thing, and even then it was a pretty dumb thing to attempt. I was still in my early 20s, though, and I was always up for any sort of adventure. I knew it was 5 minutes of driving to get to that park, so I figured it would be 20 minutes, 30 minutes of walking, and then I'd be with my family and friends. Sometimes in the wilds of Canada, though, things can get more complicated than that. Now, I won't say I regretted my decision as soon as I stepped into those woods, but I will say that I soon began to regret it. First of all, it was instantly much colder under the tree cover, and second of all, and this is the stranger part, it seemed to have begun to snow. I don't remember what month it was, but I do remember it was a summer month. Even up here, summer is still summer. It doesn't snow very often in the summer around here, so I wondered if I were witnessing something else. I caught some of it on my hand and tasted it. It tasted like snow, nothing else. It wasn't nuclear fallout, so I shrugged my shoulders and continued on what I hoped was the way to my family gathering. The path grew darker, and the wind whipped up. I was wearing a t-shirt and jeans as the weather had been warm, but by then I was shivering and holding my arms tight around myself to retain any body heat that I could. I also made my way faster than I had been traveling. Now I wasn't just confused about what was going on. I was genuinely concerned for my own health and safety. I began scrambling over rocks and ground in an almost four-legged manner, using my hands to pull myself up inclines as much as I used my feet. I found the ground wasn't as cold as the air, which seemed to indicate to me that it had only gotten cold in there very, very recently. I was now shivering, both from the cold and from raw fear, and I needed to keep in constant motion to keep myself from freezing. And then I witnessed something that was, in a sense, the most wondrous and also the most horrible thing I ever saw in my life. I can say that I studied this event with great interest, and at the same time, I can say that I ran even faster through those woods as I did so. First I heard them, I heard the fighting. I heard the screaming. Then, I noticed the grass under my hands and feet had become colder. Soon, I was walking in snow and could no longer risk using my hands for fear of frostbite. It wasn't only snowing, now it was sticking, and it was getting thicker under my feet. I wanted to maneuver away from the screaming that I was hearing, but I needed to head in that general direction to arrive where I needed to arrive. I had never been so afraid of something I was hearing before, and yet I was desperate to get out of the cold and out of those woods. Desperation can sometimes give you greater bravery, and also a bit of extra fortitude and ability to persevere. It can also lead to you crawling into a fetal position and giving up, and believe me, I wasn't far away from doing just that. So, I saw what was making the noise. I saw it, and I tried to stay far enough away that I would not be seen in return. I had no choice but to slow down my forward progress in order to stay hidden as I progressed. Hidden from what, you're probably asking? Well, as I already talked about earlier, I really only can for certain tell you about one of the things I saw. It was like a husky or a wolf or a malamute, but upright and a bit more human-looking in that sense. I don't remember looking at the legs of the creature, but I do remember him being sure-footed in his bipedal gait and stance. He was not performing a trick. He was just an upright walking creature. His paws even resembled hands in some ways, and I bet he could pick things up with them in his own way. So that was a dogman in the vernacular which has sprung up since those times. Although the thing it was fighting was far more humanoid in appearance, at least in some ways, I found it the more horrifying of the two creatures. Every time I think back on that thing, I'm gripped with a full-body memory of the moment I saw him. Even if it's a hot day, I shiver all over. It also makes me feel both nauseous and starving hungry at the same time. It was truly upsetting to look at, as it seemed some sort of a mix of a rodent and a human corpse. It had a human-shaped head, but the eyes looked black, like a deer's eyes, and it had what I guess would be called antlers on its head. Antlers on an animal usually indicates that it's a vegetarian, but this human rodent corpse thing had long claws, longer even than the dogman's claws. This would seem to indicate that it was a hunter, and therefore a carnivore, or possibly omnivore. I felt sad, not only for that thing, but also for any others of its kind. Whatever sort of food it ate, it didn't seem to have had any for a long time. Its ribs protruded, almost emerging out of its pale, dead-looking, grayish-white epidermis. It was hard to keep moving forward, even as I knew I'd feel better when I was away from that place and those things. I wanted to just stop and stare in awe. I never wanted to take my eyes off the two of them, and it was hard each time I forced myself to do just that. Something about those creatures, or possibly something about one or the other of them, made it almost feel as though my mind were being overruled, and someone else was now going to be me for a while. Each time I was able to tear my attention away, I felt more panicked than the previous time. Although I was trying not to look, I did notice some of the different mannerisms and tactics of the two creatures. The dogman attacked as you would expect a canine-based creature would do. He shouted a lot, he growled a lot, and he attacked from the front, literally going for the jugular over and over. That pale death beast, though, that thing would withdraw and make himself small, then quickly burst forward, aiming his long, sharp claws or daggers or whatever I was seeing, directly toward the dogman's eyes. He kept missing, but the fighting was foul, and underhanded. Each time the pale corpse monster thing made any contact with the canine, the poor Dogman would utter the most pitiful sound. It soon looked to me as though the Dogman were becoming as thin as his opponent. That could have been an optical illusion, but it seemed as though the Dogman's life force were being drained away, as well as his body fat. I'm not sure if it was because I thought I saw the Dogman getting thinner or what, but I found myself feeling weaker as well. My hunger and my nausea kept mounting in direct relation to each other, and I began to feel as dizzy and turned around as I felt cold. I watched the huge canine drop to his knees through the trees in the distance. He now looked thinner than the pale gray thing, which had become bloated, as though it had been floating, face down, in a lake, for days. I watched as the fight concluded. I didn't understand what I was seeing, but I watched, and I forgot where it was I had been intending to go. Someone was calling my name. I worked on coming out of my mental fog, and I looked around. I was beginning to think I had imagined being called when I heard it again. It was a friend of mine, this young woman that I was actually about to start dating a month or two after that. She had been at the gathering I was trying to get to, and she went for a walk in the woods with a mutual friend of ours. Both of them had happened upon me, looking sick and confused in the woods. When they asked me what was going on, I started to tell them. I looked around, though, and noticed that there was no more snow on the ground. I looked to where the battle had been happening, and I saw nothing at all but trees. It was warm again, and so I figured I'd better not tell them anything more. They took me with them back to the gathering, and nobody had a smile on their face when they saw me that day. They said I looked terrible, that I had lost weight, that I had rings under my eyes. I didn't care what they said. I just wanted to get something to eat, which I did, but I couldn't keep it down. Any food I had got me sick, and after I eliminated it from my system in one way or another, I would feel as though I was starving all over again. It was essentially like I caught an eating disorder. I was behaving in an unhealthy way because, well, my theory is that I was doing it because I had been sort of programmed or reprogrammed by getting too close to that tall gray being that had somehow been sucking the life out of that Dogman. I think maybe it robs your energy and your calories, even at a distance, and in the process of doing so, it might reprogram your nervous system to make it easier for the creature to victimize and drain you from then on, until there's nothing left to take from you any longer. That's a theory that makes the most sense to me, at least. It took a year or two for me to get my eating habits back in order. It took a lot of consciousness on my part, a lot of focus, a lot of being willing to do the work, and being willing to be honest with myself. Even though my new bad habits had originated outside of my own consciousness, that didn't mean I couldn't cure them, as though they had been my own bad choices instead. I just slowly reconditioned myself to behave in more of the way I would prefer to behave. It was as though the creature gave me both a physical and mental illness, and so I cured myself by treating it in that way. So I wonder if any of you might have any idea or insight as to what it was that I walked through the forest past on that summer evening. Could it have been an alien, a Wendigo, a rake? And even if you choose one of these, or another word to describe it, what is it that you're really describing? What was that thing? And for that matter, what in God's name is the Dogman? The only thing I can say for certain is, I saw Dogman battle a thing. He's James E. Brown, the godfather of soul, and thanking him will never get old, 'cause Mr. Brown is not some loser. Why, he's our new executive producer. To thank him, he's got this perk, cause that's the way donations work. International TV spokesmongrel Henry Lee Dogman will be along at the very end of the show to bring you all the deets of how you too can get cool perks while helping our channel stay online. But now let's jump into our next story, which is called Dogman vs. Mothman in Pinhook Bog. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got some information for you that you might find interesting. Have you ever heard of Pinhook Bog? It's a sort of a swamp, and I noticed that you've noticed that the Dogman seems to enjoy living in and around bogs and swamps. I noticed that too, only I noticed it up close and personal. My wife Sylvia is a college professor, and she teaches about the environment and ecology. She enjoys spending an awful lot of time in nature, and I enjoy spending an awful lot of time with her. Most of my friends gave up camping years ago, but I find that I've become an expert at it, even though I never really enjoyed camping at all until I got married. This particular bog we were in that day is open to the public, but wooden boardwalks indicate where you're allowed to go and where you should not. There are pits of quicksand in there that you can get swallowed up into. There are all sorts of critters, big and small, that can come up and take a bite out of you. It's not something to joke around about. Now, Sylvia, she doesn't follow the rules because she's one of the people who makes up the rules in the first place. She knows the purpose of each of the rules, and she knows when she's willing to take a chance to bend or break one of them. So, when we were walking along the boardwalk, hand in hand, enjoying the nature all around us, she saw nothing wrong with grabbing my hand harder and pulling me off the boardwalk and into the nature over there. I laughed at first because I thought she was being playful and romantic. When I caught the expression on her face, though, I stopped giggling and tried to figure out what the problem was. Sylvia looked deadly serious. No, more than that, Sylvia looked scared. And if she was scared, then I was terrified. But why was I terrified? My wife ducked behind some kind of a bush and pulled me down with her. The ground was muddy, but mostly solid. I knew better than to ask what was happening. I just looked where she looked and remained as quiet as I could manage. What had Sylvia seen? What could possibly frighten my hard-as-nails wife like this? I don't think I ever saw her look so scared before, and it was not something I was enjoying seeing. It was unnerving, in fact, because she's a survivalist. She's known for staying calm in the most hectic situations. One time a bear got too close to us, and she silently led me away from the area, never once looking frightened. What could exist in that bog that could be so much more frightening than a fully grown bear? I soon found the answer to that question. To be honest, I heard it first, and it made a truly horrible sound. I thought it was a person getting torn apart, I have to say. It sounded more like a human in pain than any sort of animal. I thought that someone must be in distress, and I looked at Sylvia, wondering how we could help that poor, suffering person. She gave me a stern look and a little shake of her head, and I knew to remain hidden and silent. In a few seconds, I found out why. Thud, 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 thud. Someone was approaching on the boardwalk, and it sounded like someone large, too. That same screaming erupted again, this time from much closer. I saw a huge man, thud, 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 up on the boardwalk, and I heard him shout incoherently once again. This guy must be crazy, I thought, and I wondered how my wife sensed this so long before I did. I was having a hard time making out details of the large figure because I was peeking out through bushes and plant life, when it took a few steps forward and howled. It was directly in my clear line of vision. I could see it, from the tips of its long canine ears up on top of its head, to about where its knees were, and I could see that this was not a human being that we were watching and listening to. I would call it a canine, except it wasn't. It was a man, most definitely, because it stood up on its hind legs. It walked just like a man would as well, at least from what I was seeing. It howled and howled, just as a wolf might do. I searched my brain for the reason why canines howl, and after a few seconds it came back to me. Canines howl in order to draw others of their kind to them. Even as I remembered this, I could hear other howls off in the distance. It sounded like neighborhood dogs barking, except we weren't in a neighborhood. We were in a bog, a swamp. I wondered how many of those howls came from real canines, normal canines, and how many of them came from man-sized upright walking critters like old Fido there in front of us on the boardwalk. If that dog or a man or whatever it was had just called others of its kind to this spot, then I wanted to be anywhere but that spot. I looked at Sylvia and pleaded with her using my eyes, but she ignored me and made a motion for me to settle down. She was looking as annoyed with me as she was looking scared of the Dogman on the boardwalk. I wanted to run. In fact, I never wanted to run so badly in my entire life. I also wanted to pee really badly, but even more than that, I wanted to run. Nevertheless, my mind overruled my body because I knew that, in spite of all my years of camping with her, she knew a lot more about what goes on in the swamps and bogs than I will ever know. I somehow forced myself to stay down and remain hidden, but it was hard to do. I began seeing spots in front of my eyes, and I knew I was beginning to faint. For this reason, I stopped observing the Dogman for some time and closed my eyes. I sat back on the muddy ground and focused on my breathing until I found myself feeling more human again. A feeling of hope began to return to me. The creature couldn't stand there forever, could he? We just needed to wait for our moment, then book it out of there. I told myself it was going to be all right, and I started to believe it, too. Sylvia gasped, and all my hope drained from me. If she broke her own rule about remaining silent, that had to mean something happened that would surprise even her. Anything in nature that could shock my wife might have a much harsher effect on me, but still, I needed to see. Opening my eyes, I began to wonder if I had fallen asleep and was having a nightmare. Behind the upright standing Dogman rose a figure. This figure was so dark that it seemed to suck all the light out of the area immediately surrounding it. The one exception were these two large glowing red circular eyes, so large that they looked like stoplights on this thing's head. Or you know those red circular bicycle reflectors? That's what they look like more than they look like eyes. But they must have been eyes because that was where they were placed on what passed for this thing's head. As interested as I was scared, I stared intently as that thing grew taller and taller, standing maybe 1 or 2 feet behind the Dogman, who had not noticed it yet. Look, I think that Dogman was well over 6 feet tall. It was hard to tell from the bushes, but that thing might have even been over 7 feet tall. The black, red-eyed something rising up behind him grew taller than the Dogman by some measure, and then, with the sound of sails unfurling in a strong wind, 2 absolutely immense bat-like wings flung themselves out from the creature's back, and the Dogman finally took notice of what was behind him. The most nauseatingly savage battle between 2 animals that I have ever had the misfortune to witness erupted. Both of them seemed to be fighting for survival, and it got uglier and uglier. I had no empathy for either creature, yet felt deep pity for each as the other did terribly damaging things to him. And then my pity would go to the other, as both took turns doing unspeakably unthinkable things to each other. I have to say, the Dogman was taking the brunt of it. Since the black red-eyed figure did not even seem to have arms, I was not clear on what it was actually doing to damage the Dogman so much, but both creatures uttered the most pitiful cries of pain and remorse that I'd ever heard. I wanted to cry for them, almost as much as I wanted to get out of there, before Sylvia and I suffered the same treatment. The wings of the red-eyed one stretched out to the side like sails, and somehow I saw both figures begin to rise into the air. I have no idea what I was looking at, since the wings on that bigger creature were not flapping. How could it be lifting off the ground if it was not even flapping its wings? Everything about the red-eyed thing spoke in dream language. Neither the dog-headed man nor the bat-winged bird thing seemed like anything that could possibly exist in anything but a dream reality. We were watching the winged one lift the other off the ground, and I fully expected to see it fly that Dogman away to whatever passed for its bird nest. That is not what happened, though. Loudly bursting on the scene from two different directions came two dogmen covered in different shades of fur from that first one. They leaped onto the flying creature, and it soon weighed too much to fly. The three dog beasts made short work bringing the giant bird down and proceeding to do to it what dogs always do to birds. They succeed in catching. That was our cue to get out of there, and believe me, that's what we did. Later, I googled around for a while, and the closest thing I found to describe what we saw that day was a dogman fighting a Mothman. Now to me, that thing looked nothing at all like a moth. I guess they named it that because of those large red insect-like eyes, but I don't know. It was more like a bird or a giant mutated bat than it was like a moth. I showed my research to Sylvia, and she lectured me on pseudoscience. She said there's no such thing as the Dogman, and no such thing as the Mothman. As little sense as that declaration makes after what we've been through, she is adamant about it, and refuses to discuss the matter at all. I guess she'd lose her job if people thought she believed in cryptids, and I know how much she loves her career. I'm not going to force her to come clean about this, because it might cost her the job that matters so much to her. It would be a great thing if she reaches a point in her career where she can risk telling the truth about all of this, as someone with her training and expertise would really open some eyes to this situation. Until then, all I have are my memories of Dogman vs. Mothman in Pinhook Bog. When I think of life without Mary Gillies, I feel all sick and kinda silly, and that's because there's been nary an executive producer as great as Mary. Please join me in thanking today's executive producer, Mary Gillies, for making this episode possible. Mary gets lots of our perks, such as our secret uncensored Dogman stories, and our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories, each of them too wild to ever tell on this channel. We've got lots of ways you can help us stay alive. International TV spokesmongrel Henry Lee Dogman will be along at the very end of the show to bring you all the deets of how you too can get cool perks while helping our channel stay online. But now let's jump into our next story, which is called Chased by a Giant Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I grew up and made my fortune in Wisconsin, home of the Wisconsin werewolf. I never saw a cryptid in all that time, and I never believed in them either. Then, when I retired to Florida after selling my business, I moved to a somewhat rural area. It was there I learned that the wilderness can be just as savage and unforgiving as any of the most cutthroat cities, especially a wilderness inside of which lives the North American upright walking Canid, or Dogman. I've been retired now as many years as I worked toward that retirement, so it's hard for me to even remember that I used to be a hard-working city boy. When you grow up in the urban jungle, you learn how feral most other human beings can be, and you long for life in the actual jungle, or at least in the forest in nature. It looks so serene from the city after all, birds tweeting and flowers blooming. Even though life has treated me well, it's true that I gained my wealth by being meaner than the most evil people in the kind of business that I used to be involved with. This is why I got my FU money and got out of that world as soon as I could. These days I've had enough weird experiences and been knocked on my behind often enough to know that I still know very little about anything. In those days, however, retiring while still in my early 30s, I had a pretty big ego, patting myself on the back for having figured the world out. I thought I understood everything because of my success in business. For me, it took retirement to humble me enough to start learning the world for real. It turns out you can't actually learn anything new at all until you admit to yourself that you are uninformed or confused in the first place. People who think they know it all can't learn anything new at all ever. And at that age, my self-congratulating ego was so large that it took the Dogman to cut me down to size. I can't remember if I was 33 or 34 years old, but I decided I needed time off from the human race. Other than some employees in some other locations, the only two men I kept with me in my move to Florida was my chauffeur Jack and my butler. At the time, that felt like roughing it. When you consider I kept my new address a secret and avoided inviting anyone over for the first 3 years or 4, I really was sort of becoming almost a hermit. I must have really needed a break from humanity. I got a place on the west side of the east coast of Florida. It's pretty tight-packed over there, but we managed to own enough land and have high enough walls to maintain my new hermit image. I would sneak out with my chauffeur Jack sometimes and go into the Everglades on little jaunts. At first, we took a tourist tour, and then we started exploring more on our own, both the Everglades and neighboring towns in the area. One day we wandered into some kind of animal shelter place, and there was a beautiful young German shepherd there that they were gonna put to sleep because they had no space to keep her in. I took her with me, and I gave them a donation to get more space, rather than doing away with innocent animals that never hurt anybody. Big Ethel the dog started coming with me and Jack on our day trips into nature, and eventually Jack would just drop me and my girl off someplace and we'd spend the day out on our own in the hot Florida sun. We were in a natural area near Parkland one day, having ourselves a good long walk through the swamps. It was a dirt path built up for walkers and runners that ran through a watery area of swampland. You could see gators from there, but as long as it didn't rain too much and the water level didn't get too high, then you'd be safe on that walkway. Probably. Ethel was a smart dog. She knew to stay away from the edge. Sometimes I'd see people bring little yappy dogs there, and that was terrifying. They'd bark at the gators and act like they were going to run down the edge to fight. The last thing I ever want to see is a fight between an alligator and a little yappy dog. With Ethel, I had her on a leash, but it was long, and I never once remember having to really use it. I'd hook it around my wrist and then forget about it, as Ethel never strayed more than a few feet away from me. She would bark when she was happy and at dinner time, but she really didn't bark at people or animals. She was so much lower maintenance than other dogs. In fact, Ethel probably worked harder taking care of me than vice versa. If I had been with anyone else when this next thing happened, I don't know if I would be telling you or anyone this story right now. If it hadn't been for good old Ethel, in fact, I don't think I'd have even still been on this earth. So we had been out there in the sun for a few hours, and by the time the sun started setting, I was in no rush to leave the park. The sunset was beautiful, and out there, the sky is everywhere, like the largest color abstract painting that there could be. Looking out over the swamp, you see patches of water reflecting every color up in the sky. It can feel incredibly peaceful, even while the alligators swim about in the water out there. I was enjoying the occasional cool breeze as the night started to come on, and we both slowed down our walking pace. That was when things just went completely bonkers inside of 2 seconds. There was a splashing and a sort of a screaming out in the water, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. Ethel freaked out, barking and growling in the direction of the disturbance, which, as I've said already, was a very rare occurrence. When I saw what she was seeing, I felt my knees almost buckle underneath me. I was feeling something I hadn't felt since I got bullied in 6th grade. I was feeling fear. What I was seeing was some kind of a Sasquatch with what I at first took to be a horse head. I didn't realize till a few seconds later that it was a long-snouted canine. With the water and foam in the air partially obscuring the beast in my first quick glance, a brief optical illusion was created where I thought I was viewing the head of a horse in a front view over the body of a fur-covered human being. It was in the water, but it seemed to be making a fast and angry beeline directly toward me and my dog friend. In my adult life up to that point, I had viewed myself as brave, as deadly, as a badass. It went without saying that I was brave and that I had nerves of steel. How else could I have been a millionaire before I was 25 years old, right? Clearly I was a man who was a cut above other men. But when I saw that big, wet, hairy cryptid screaming and running in my direction, I squealed like a little girl and ran away like a Jerry Lewis character in an old 20th century comedy film. Or Lou Costello, take your pick. In case you don't watch old movies, I'm trying to say that I was no hero when I faced off against what turned out to be the Dogman. I was an abject coward when push came to shove, and if that dog leash hadn't been hooked over my wrist, I would have been running and leaving my dog there with a 9 or 10 foot tall cryptid heading in her direction. I started at first running down the dirt path back to the entrance of the place. When the creature followed me and Ethel up onto that dirt platform, I turned around to get another brief glance at the giant horse-headed man. Now, of course, I could see it was not a horseman at all, but it was a wolf-headed man instead. Or at least a dog of some kind. Its head shape was not actually all that different from my Ethel. The snout was maybe a bit longer. The teeth were much longer, and the overall size was gigantic compared to my girl Ethel, being sort of an average-sized German shepherd. We were more than a little outmatched. I never felt so scared in my life, but judging by the shouting and bellowing coming from the beast chasing us, he was angry about something. He was acting like he'd caught me making out with his girlfriend, you know, like I just staged a hostile takeover of his company behind his back. He was acting like he had a grudge against me, like he had a score to settle. I never saw this creature before in my life, but his clear hatred of me was strangely making me feel guilty. I kept wishing I could apologize to him to calm him down, but I didn't even know what I was supposed to have done. I was starting to run out of steam, and we were still not close to the exit or any place where other people might be who could help me. Ethel the dog was running in front of me, and I grew so weak that she was beginning to pull me along to some extent. There was a patch of dry-ish land next to the walkway. She ran down onto it. I was gasping for air as I tripped down the hill after her, narrowly avoiding falling on my face. I quickly realized that Ethel was trying to take a shortcut to the parking lot. She was truly a very smart friend of mine. Her feet were smaller and her weight less, though, so it was a lot easier for her to run on mud. As for me, I was slipping and sliding all over the place, growing ever more exhausted, until about 30 feet away from the exit, I staggered and landed hard on my knees in the mud inside some tall grass. Ethel whimpered and tried in vain to pull me further, but I was unable to do anything at all, except gasp desperately for air. I couldn't breathe enough. I couldn't get the oxygen in my lungs fast enough. And then, the dog-headed man caught up with me. Ethel bravely stood between the two of us, growling furiously at the much, much larger, upright-walking canine. The dogman pulled its lips back, revealing teeth that, by themselves, were taller than Ethel's entire head. She ran back to me whimpering, sadly, her tail between her legs. I hugged my dog and continued to gasp for enough air to try to keep from blacking out. The Dogman took a step or two nearer. I forgot that I was an atheist, and I prayed to God, Jesus, Buddha, and pretty much anyone else that's ever been prayed to. I lowered my head like a coward, and I got prepared for everything to end in a whole lot of pain. The Dogman screamed. It shouted at me as though it had cornered the world's worst villain, and now it was about to take its revenge. I closed my eyes and got ready for the grand finale, as they say. But then, slurp, slurp, slosh, I heard the Dogman walking away from me. I could feel Ethel relax in my embrace, and I opened my eyes in time to see the Dogman re-entering the swamp. Apparently having delivered the message he was chasing me to deliver. I laughed, and Ethel wagged her tail. I pet her, and she danced in front of me. We were safe. I stood up to walk the last few feet out of the grass, and that was when I got my first heart attack of my life. They told me later that I might have been laying in that grass for hours, as I fell face first into the dirt. Ethel had dragged me a few feet and barked up a lot of attention, so that I was on my way to a hospital in under 15 minutes. That's what saved my life. Ethel the dog, and a few good Samaritans and animal lovers who figured out that she wasn't just barking randomly. That wasn't the last attack I've had, but most of the time I managed fine. My lifestyle has changed drastically, it had to. Obviously, since this is now decades from then, a person can sometimes survive for some time with this kind of a problem. Having a lot of money at your disposal doesn't hurt, but most of it has been a kind of lifestyle change that it really doesn't take cash at hand to make. I have to watch what I eat, and I have to get regular, moderate exercise. I have to avoid distressing people and media, and most of all, I have to improve my own personal outlook on life. I have to find a relaxed response to even the most stressful of input and experiences. And most of all, I have to make very, very certain that I'm never again chased by a giant dogman. When you need an executive producer who can scratch that itch, the one that you're looking for is Matthew Stitch. Please join us in thanking Matthew Stitch, who used our new thanks button to donate $50 American to the channel. With the recent shadow banning we're suffering on YouTube, with our numbers cut in half or more, this channel has definitely been put on the endangered species list. If it weren't for people like Matthew Stitch, we might have already gone under in that swampy Dogman quicksand, never to rise again. Besides just donating to keep us alive, Matthew also has a song suggestion. We can't play it on this channel for copyright reasons, but we can pass on his recommendation to you. Matthew Stitch says, and I quote, "What's up guys, I got a song for you that might kind of explain what these things are. It's a rap song by Destiny Lab, look them up on YouTube, and the song is called Paranormal Species. It says these things, Mothman, Dogman, the Slender Man, and other things like them, are extremely spiritual in nature, and they might even be from the days of old, in ancient times. Anyway, hope you guys check out the song. God bless, and Jesus loves you." We certainly send the same warm sentiments back to you, Mr. Stitch. Here to explain how you too can be a heroic figure like Matthew Stitch, I'd like to present international TV spokesmongrel Henry Lee Dogman. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos, or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.